Welcome, everyone. My name is Lindsay Spear. I'm the campaign director for Heat Smart CNY. We're a program of Alliance for a Green Economy, which is a local nonprofit based out of Syracuse, New York, and the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. We are one of many, many clean heating and cooling communities funded by NYSERDA in New York State, and we are joined by our colleagues at Finger Lakes North to talk about geothermal heat pumps tonight. Both of our campaigns do a lot of outreach and education around heat pumps and how do we, both save more money in terms of the way we spend our energy bills and how do we decarbonize our heating system so we're not contributing to climate change. We ask people today, sorry, if you have questions along the way, we're going to have you drop the questions in the chat and we will do questions and answers at the end. And I will turn it over to Matt to introduce his campaign.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Corona. I'm the campaign manager for Heat Smart Monroe. Heat Smart Monroe is a program of the Climate Solutions Accelerator. We're a local climate-focused nonprofit based in Rochester, New York. I forgot this was regional, so I just said local, but we're in Rochester. And so, yeah, we're are basically similar to, we're a sister campaign of Lindsay's campaign. So essentially our goals are to help eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from homes by replacing fossil fuel-based heating systems with heat pumps. So we're really just a public resource for people to get information, as well as find local contractors and such. And I don't have as much information on this slide about my campaign, but we also hold events and talk to people and help clients, and similar to what Lindsay does, just in our area.
And we'll give contact information at the end in case you want to follow up with more details and connect with local installers. Here's a map of all the different clean heating and cooling communities across the state. You'll see most of the state is covered by some program that's there to help you make decisions for your home on clean heating and cooling. Okay, and we're going to stop sharing now and switch over to our guest speaker for the evening. We'd like to welcome Rob Richardson, who's going to tell us about the process of going geothermal for his home.
1 second here. All right. Can everybody hear me? Cool. So my name is Rob Richardson, and I am the Clean Energy Communities Coordinator in the Genesee Finger Lakes region. Tonight, however, I'm going to be speaking to you wearing a different hat. I am a homeowner who recently participated in a clean heating and cooling campaign program and had a geothermal installed on my house. So I'm going to walk you through what that was like for my family and I step for step. Before I do that, though, just a little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's in politics and government from the University of Hartford and a master's in public administration from the College of Brockport. The College of Brockport degree is significant because right out of that program, I was hired to be the assistant city manager in Canandaigua, New York. And as part of that position, I was tasked with all of the city's environmental programs and initiatives. During my tenure there, I guided the city to both a Clean Energy Communities designation as well as a Climate Smart Communities bronze certification. And really enjoyed working in both of those programs. So when the opportunity to help all 188 municipalities in our region engage those programs became available, it was too good to pass up, which is exactly how I landed in my current role at Genesee Finger Lakes. In my spare time, I'm a boys soccer coach. I've been the boys varsity assistant at Harley Allendale Columbia, which is 2 small schools that combine for athletics in Rochester, New York. And other than that, my favorite job is dad. So to get started with my story, it really started January 31st, 2021. That was the day that my wife and I had an offer accepted on our first house. And it was a really kind of an emotional thing. We'd both worked extremely hard to get this home. And, I think it's important to point out the context that this is our forever home. We do not intend to leave. And we bought this home really hoping and expecting that it was going to be where we raised our family and where we stayed. Like any property that you buy or home that you buy, however, it's highly likely that there's going to be some things that need to be addressed, and our home was no different. There was just one problem, or three actually, and they were all very interconnected. My furnace, my hot water tank, and my air conditioning unit all needed to be addressed just by basic visual inspection. We didn't quite know the extent when we moved in and when we purchased the house. We did know that we were going to need to replace these sooner rather than later. But we also knew that we weren't going to close until April, so that we had a lot of time to kind of explore what our options were and decide what the best path forward was going to be for us. And in doing that, prior to moving in, we explored a whole bunch of different gas or electric options. We had some quotes from a couple of different contractors. We were only really interested in top-end high efficiency equipment, which is going to impact the price. But that was what we were really interested in, and weren't really interested in anything else. Where I found myself in a little bit of a conundrum was, here I am, I'm going to go spend all this money on this house, and now I'm going to have to spend all this extra money just to keep it, warm and cool in the summer and have hot water. But I'm still going to be paying in perpetuity for heating my home, and I'm still going to have to, deal with potential environmental impact and the variable prices of natural gas. It wasn't something that I was really interested in doing, to be quite honest. And I started to get a little bit frustrated with the process. And I had one of those, there's got to be a better way moments. And luckily there was. Because the day after we had the offer accepted on our home, I started as the Clean Energy Communities Coordinator in our region. And during that process of onboarding, I learned about a variety of different programs attached to NYSERDA and the Clean Energy Communities program, one of them being the clean heating and cooling campaigns that were ongoing. I spoke to Brendan Ryan, who at the time worked for the Clean Heating and Cooling campaign in Monroe County, and he had just had a geothermal installed on his home, and he absolutely loved it. It was the first time that he'd had an even climate in his home. It was the first time that he'd had air conditioning without the extra electric expense or the expense of an additional unit. He was able to get the cost down substantially by utilizing rebates and incentives. But the one thing that he said that really kind of hooked my attention was he had eliminated his gas bill completely. And he was no longer paying NYSEG in perpetuity to heat his home. That really resonated with me to the point where I came home that night and I spoke to my wife about it. And we did some cursory calculations and let it ruminate for a couple of days. But we made a decision that we were going to go geothermal. We were going to commit to the process. And I was actually really excited about it, especially after the new role that I had taken on. On April 19th, we closed on our home. This is a picture from the day that we moved in, and my daughter's smile to the day that I die will touch my heart. It was a very joyous day for us, and we love living here. A week after we moved in and had most of our stuff unpacked, we called Alternative Carbon Energy Solutions, who was our clean heating and cooling representative for this area based on where I live geographically. And we scheduled the initial walkthrough and property inspection for May 6th. On May 6th, Zach showed up, super friendly guy, as I'm sure you can see by the picture. I do want to give a shout out to ACES because they were extremely flexible throughout this entire process. To be honest, they were incredible. Everybody was really excited to be part of a documentary process. Everybody was excited to explain what they were doing. So, kudos to them for not just, allowing me to do this, but really participating actively. As part of Zach's assessment, he did a variety of different things. He checked the electrical panel to make sure that either the panel had the capacity to run the heat pump or that it had the capacity to support a sub panel to power the system. He looked at all of our existing ductwork to make sure that it was going to allow the system to flow the way that we wanted it to. He checked all the dampers in the wiring. He checked the hot water tank. He looked at the size of the existing unit to make sure the footprint for what we were going to install was going to fit. And he did a check of the air conditioning unit outside. What we found is that it was worse than we thought it was. The furnace had been installed in 1989, as was the hot water tank. And we could not pin down when the air conditioner had been installed, but we knew that the last time that particular model had been manufactured was in 1993. So obviously we're not dealing with efficient equipment, we're dealing with equipment, all of which is past its useful life. And as we would come to find out, it was actually really critical that we took on this process because it was very likely that we were going to have problems with our furnace in the winter. And I say that because this is the actual furnace coil that was being utilized in my home. It was cracked in several spots, as you can see. There were tons of chips in it. The casing was rusting and corroding in several spots to the point where it really should have been addressed. However, the person who worked on the system chose to use what are called shiny tape solutions, which are when there's areas that are corroding or gaps in the ductwork that need to be fixed. They use what should be a temporary solution as a permanent solution. And, you know, as you can see, just based on this picture, that was clearly the case in our home. If that wasn't enough, there was more. We found that we had a custom job, to quote the installers who put in the geothermal system. The entire time that Zach was doing his walkthrough of my property, we could not find the coil for the air conditioner, but we knew the air conditioner was active. We looked everywhere. We could not locate it. It wasn't until we did the teardown of the furnace itself that we found the air conditioning coil. It had been literally sat in there. It was not bracketed or mounted. It wasn't screwed down in any way, shape, or form. As you can see, it was on a tilt, so it wasn't even level. And what they did is they put the coil in there, they folded the HVAC casing back down on the outside, and they taped it shut. So I consider myself very lucky that we did this process early and we identified this. It surprises me that this held up as long as it did because the workmanship was not good. And to be quite honest, this is dangerous on a lot of levels. Oh, and another fun fact, it was a custom job in the fact that my doorbell had been run through my furnace. We don't know why that was, but in order for the doorbell to work, when they took the furnace apart and they changed the electrical, our doorbell went. So despite there being a hookup for the furnace itself, they chose to, or for the doorbell, they chose to run it through the furnace for whatever reason. The other part of the assessment was a property assessment. So while he was there, Zach walked around my property for a couple different reasons. One, we're trying to assess the best location to drill. Where is the best spot? Where is the ground going to make this process the smoothest or simplest as it can be? Are we going to need to go horizontal or can we go vertical? Are we going to need one well or multiple wells chained together? What kind of equipment are we going to be able to use based on where we're going to drill? And based on his property assessment, we determined that the best place for us to drill was going to be in the front of the house. So based on that, he told me they were going to be able to use the big drill rig, which should really speed the process up and make it go a little bit quicker. He explained all the outlines for me and the timelines moving forward of what it was going to look like. The drilling was going to be about 3 to 4 days based on the equipment that we were using. The trenching was going to be about a day because of the vicinity of where the well was going to be to where they were going to enter the house. And the installation was going to take about 2 to 3 days as long as everything was there and available to install. We determined the vertical well was going to be the best option. So we contacted the drillers that they worked with and scheduled an assessment for them to come June 1st, which was almost a month after our initial meeting. But when they came out, they did agree that, you know, Zach's idea of where we should drill was the right one. The one thing that was going to be a little bit of a challenge is that they weren't going to be able to actually start drilling on my property until August 16th. So from June 1st to August 16th, we kind of just waited for the process to kick off. We did have things that we needed to do, though, to keep the project moving along. We got the proposal, reviewed all the equipment, made those determinations about what we wanted to buy, and then signed off to authorize the work. We looked at a bunch of different funding mechanisms for how we were going to pay for this particular project. We also needed to make sure that we took care of all of our municipal requirements. In the city of Canandaigua, the only thing that we needed to do was have a simple building permit. It varies from municipality to municipality what that looks like. However, ACES, as they were throughout the entire process, was fantastic and took care of all the paperwork for us. The only thing that we needed to do was actually sign the building permit for them. We had the driller scheduled for August 16th, and we knew that that was going to be the project kickoff. And then on August 16th, right on schedule, the driller showed up at my house. What you're looking at is about $1 million piece of equipment sitting in my driveway. It is one of the coolest pieces of machinery I've ever seen in my entire life. And at times while they were drilling, I felt like a 4-year-old watching a construction site because it was so cool and so fascinating to watch how this thing worked. I also learned that the toughest part about being a driller is not the actual drilling itself, it's maintaining these trucks. There is so much automation, there's so many gauges, nothing is computerized. So anytime you have an issue that you need to troubleshoot, it can take a long time to figure out what the problem is. And simply just keeping these trucks running is a huge expense, to the point where most geothermal companies will contract out, because if you're not constantly drilling, you're losing money. We actually did run into a little bit of a hiccup during the drilling process. When they brought the truck in, we realized that we were not going to be able to drill in the front corner of my lawn like we thought. There is a tree that overhangs and prevented us from being able to put the arm at a full 90-degree angle. You can kind of see it in this photo right here. So what we had to do was reposition the truck, swing it back straight, and drill right down underneath my driveway. A little bit of a change in plan and tactics that I wasn't really anticipating. But at this point, I was so excited for the project to get started that it didn't really bother me that they were going to be drilling under my driveway. And on the photo on the right was when the drill actually broke ground. For the next 2 days, they drilled a vertical well 500 feet below my driveway. It was a very cool process to watch because, as I mentioned, this whole truck is automated. So there are actually arms and levers and mechanisms that pick the pipes up from the side of the truck and bring them back over, bring them and mount them into the arm itself and drive it right down into the borehole. That piping is lowered down to the borehole, right to the bedrock, to create a seal, but also to prevent dirt from collapsing in around the hole that's been dug. They then poured grout down to solidify that space around the casing, but also to prevent groundwater contamination and to assist with the heat transfer. The reason that it's necessary is because the high density polyethylene pipe loop that they put down into the well does have a little bit of antifreeze in it. The reason that that's important is if the ground ever gets really, really cold and the water in the system freezes, we're going to have a big problem. So the next 2 days of the process were really just cleanup. They took a giant vacuum and put it down into the hole and sucked all the sediment and groundwater out and put it into giant bags for burial or disposal. If we had gone with a vertical loop system as opposed, or a horizontal loop system as opposed to a vertical, they would have buried this when they covered everything back up from the trenching. Because we went with a vertical, they weren't able to do that, so they just removed it from the property. When they were done, there was a pipe that was up back from where they were drilled. And when they left the property on August 19th, this is what it looked like. You can see that the pipe connecting down to the well is exposed and capped in the driveway. There's the bag for sediment that they were ultimately going to remove and dispose of. I was really impressed with the drillers because they showed a lot of courtesy in trying to protect my property and make sure that there weren't groundwater sediment sprayed up on the house. They took a lot of care and caution. So I was really grateful. And considering all the work that they'd done, this isn't even that big of a mess as far as I was concerned, because I thought they did a great job. On August 23rd, the trenchers came. That's AJ and Jason that work for ACES. They put the bucket of that Bobcat right up next to the foundation of my house, and it made me nervous, to be quite honest with you. But they were extremely surgical with their equipment and did a fantastic job. I realized very quickly that I was in good hands with guys who knew what they were doing, were very experienced. As you can see, they had to pull a bush out. You can see in the picture on the right there that there was all sorts of huge roots and giant boulders that we didn't know were actually in the soil. That could have complicated the process, but they just made it happen. Once they had trenched away from the house, they continued to go around the front of my property. I had this photo in here because the gentleman in the bottom right-hand corner, his name is AJ, and he is actually the president and owner of ACES. And as part of the culture of his company, it's important for his guys to know that he supports them and he's willing to do the dirty work. And he literally insists on getting into the trenches with them and doing this manual labor to let them know that, he doesn't think he's better than anybody and that he's just one of the guys, and that the most important thing is that the job gets done right. So I was just beyond impressed with everybody that was sent from ACES to work on our property, and in particular, just the leadership and the type of operation that AJ wants to run. So as I mentioned, we had the unforeseen issue of having to drill under the driveway. So once they had trenched across the front lawn, they had to cut the driveway with a saw and then use the bobcat to pull back the asphalt. This really didn't add much of a delay to the process, even though it wasn't something that was anticipated. And again, they were extremely surgical and went through this very, very quickly. They continued to trench once they pulled back the driveway till the pipe was exposed to about 5.5 feet or so. Once they'd done that, AJ cut the pipe, essentially exposing the well and opening it. And then he took the rest of that pipe and lifted it off with the bobcat. The pipe was so heavy, there was no way they were going to be able to lift it. So they actually need to be able to use a heavy piece of machinery like that in order for it to work. And while AJ was doing that, Jason was drilling holes in my foundation. Again, a little nerve-wracking, but this is what's required to connect the loop that goes into the heat pump to the actual well itself. So I thought it was an interesting picture. I really hope I never have holes like that in my foundation ever again. Once they had done that, they connected the polyethylene pipe loop that was in the well to the house itself. So as you can see, they're installing joints to the pipe using a process that has heat that creates a seal that is stronger than industrial adhesive. So these should never come undone, and they should be, permanently sealed while still having flexibility to, move if they need to move in any way without potentially damaging the pipe itself. Once they did that, they started to connect the piping that was in the well into the house itself. So they took just long pipes connected to the well, ran them right into the foundation of the basement, as you can see in that photo on the right. This process was really, really quick. And we ended up having this with the visual of the two pipes just kind of coming into my basement. Once that was done, they did a pressure test on the loop to make sure that the pressure was good for the guys who were actually coming in to do the install. Because this is a closed loop system, that water pressure is important for a variety of reasons, including the longevity of the equipment itself. So the fact that they took the time to do the pressure test to make sure that the work that they had done was right says a lot about the company that I was working with. Once they did the pressure test and capped off those pipes coming into the basement and sealed them all up, they basically went back out and refilled the trench that they had dug. Was not as flat as I had hoped it was going to be once they filled it back in. But again, this is something that was, in the long run, kind of a minor inconvenience. And when they left that day, this is what I had. You can see the extremely elevated just dirt running around the front of my house. You can see some of the boulders in the photo on the right there at the bottom. We had a lot of those, way, way, way more than they had anticipated. So we had a lot of huge rocks just kind of like out on our lawn that had been brought up through the trenching process, but that they couldn't put back in. You can also see that there was some damage to the driveway, and they kind of repaired it the best they could with some stone. Again, not an ideal situation, but when I weighed the pros against the cons of potentially having to fix the driveway, the benefits of moving forward with the project were far more substantial. So on August 25th, the inspection itself was scheduled to begin. However, not all of the equipment was in. So the decision was made to kind of do all of the installation with the exception of the actual heat pump itself. So they came in, they installed the hybrid hot water heater and tank. They set up all the piping and wiring. They prepped the sub panel for the geothermal unit once it was installed. They removed unnecessary gas hookups, piping, and wiring. With my furnace, there was substantially a lot of that for whatever reason. So I was really glad that they cleaned that up as part of this process. And they connected my doorbell to the proper hookup so that it could operate independently of my HVAC system. The remainder of the installation was scheduled for September 1st. They knew that the unit that I needed or that I had ordered was coming in over that weekend. So they felt confident that we could schedule and wrap up the installation on the 1st. And this is just a quick look at some of the work that was done on the 25th. Here you can see Lance installing the hot water tank and switching that out. Also doing some of the electrical work to run the sub panel over to where the geothermal system is so it could be powered. When they left that day, this is what was there. You can see that they had brought the pipes all the way up through the ceiling of the basement and put them over the ductwork so that when they came in to finish the installation and put the actual heat pump itself in, they were ready to go. So essentially they did everything but put the actual heat pump itself in that day. And on September 1st, as scheduled, they came with the heat pump, and it was a very large and very heavy unit. I was very impressed with how quickly and efficiently they were able to get it down my narrow stairs into my basement. And I heard some really fascinating stories about situations that were more difficult to get the equipment down. But you know, the efficiency and the speed that these two worked with was fantastic. And once they got the unit into the basement was when we started to do the tear down of the existing furnace. As you can see, the tape there from where the air conditioning coil was ultimately found. The picture on the far right was Lance calling upstairs to me saying, "Hey, we found the air conditioning coil," and proudly displaying it once we knew where it was. But you can also see, you know, the shiny tape solutions that have been used instead of really addressing some of the issues that might have made the system more efficient or potentially have a longer useful life. Once the furnace was completely torn down, they prepped the ductwork for the new heat pump that was being put in. And as advertised, it slid right into what was already there. So, you know, once they had that slid in and lined up with the ductwork, they started to finish the installation. A couple photos of the actual equipment itself. On the left there, you can kind of see what the inside of it looks like. All the electrical components are at the bottom. However, they're much more condensed than there were on the previous unit that was there. You can also see the fan there for blowing. On the right, you can see the coiling technology. It's tightly wound, it's stacked on top of itself. It's designed to be more efficient. And when you compare that to the technology in the furnace that was removed, you can, you know, just see the advancement and, you know, not just understanding of ways to make this system better, but how we could harness a different source to heat and cool our homes without using a fossil fuel. Once the system was in, Mark started to deal with the pressure system and pressurize the entire system to the optimal level. Again, this is a closed loop system. It's a fully closed loop system, and having this non-pressure valve port in the basement allows me to do a variety of things that I would not be able to do with the system otherwise. This is them really finishing up and making sure that the system is going to run at its optimal level and that all the pressures within the unit itself are on point. While he was doing that, Lance was in my driveway making custom ductwork. And to be honest, this is one of the coolest processes that I watched during the entire process of installing the system. He took just generic sheet metal, and within 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops, he created the type of things that you would expect to see at Lowe's or Home Depot, stamped and ready for purchase. Again, the quality of workmanship and the pride of workmanship that was displayed throughout this entire project was just incredible. And I feel like the custom ductwork that they did to mount the system with my existing furnace that was being installed with the existing ductwork was just fantastic. Mark then started to work on the panel, run the electric. What you're actually looking at is the sub panel that was installed on the wall next to the hot water tank that powers the geothermal system itself, and made sure that everything was up and running and put the system live. But at about 4:30, they'd been there for 9 hours and they were tired, and they asked me, you know, I know that we had said that we wanted to get everything done today. Would it be okay if we came back tomorrow? We don't want to rush through the cleanup. We want to make sure that we take the time to explain to you how the system works. And again, I was more than happy to accommodate that with the professionalism that was being shown. You know, they really wanted to make sure that this was done right on every level, including that I knew how to get the most out of what I was getting. So the next day they came over in the morning, they finished cleaning up the basement, they removed the exterior AC unit and sealed the holes up in the foundation. They explained how everything works, and they were gone within 2 hours of them getting there. A week later, the City of Canandaigua code enforcement official came in and did his final inspection as required by the building permit. He was there for less than 10 minutes, and what's there is a direct quote. He was amazed at how well everything was put together. He thought the technology was really cool, was really fascinated by the whole thing. So our municipal requirements with the city ended up being really light and not anything that we needed to be concerned about. And ultimately, the code enforcement official thought the project was awesome. And here she is all installed. We have affectionately named her Myrtle and consider her part of our family now. But we have a fully functioning geothermal unit in my house, which feels really good to say out loud. It's nice to be able to walk the talk in the type of work that I do. It's also really nice to be able to set the kind of example that I want to set for my daughter and understanding her responsibility to the world that she lives in. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits too that we'll cover in the upcoming slides, but this is what my system looks like fully installed. So with any project like this, especially the scale where you're breaking ground and drilling into a foundation, there's going to be some disruption. Overall, I felt like the disruption in my process was pretty minimal, but I think it's important to point out that that's on a sliding scale based on the project and the person, quite frankly. There are things that didn't bother me in the process that may have bothered another person or vice versa. But in terms of the overall experience, we didn't feel like we had a ton of disruption. In total, the project spanned almost 4 months, but the biggest delay on that was just the drillers. It took almost a month for them to come to the property after ACES did their initial walkthrough, which is understandable because they're extremely busy and they've got a lot of things going on in addition to these projects. So I was really fortunate that I was able to get them over there as quickly as I was. Once they did the walkthrough, the fastest they could get to us was another 10 weeks. Again, they have limited capacity, they have other projects, they have so much equipment. It was just how long it took, unfortunately. But it was the longest part of the process as well. Once the work started, it went relatively quickly. It took 18 calendar days, but the actual work time in terms of the days that they were actually on the property was probably 7.5 or 8. Regardless of whether it was the drillers, the trenchers, or the installers, everyone was gone by 3:30, with the exception of that last day of the install where they asked if they could come back the next day. Extremely considerate of my home, extremely considerate of the space they were in, extremely courteous in terms of picking up after themselves. I had no disruption in terms of our home life or our ability to work from home, as my wife and I both work from home. I didn't have any problems going to get my daughter every day. So, in terms of the disruption to our daily life, it was extremely minimal. The drill rig and the equipment did need to stay on my property for 4 days. That is something that I think might have aggravated other people or been a frustration for other people not having the use of their driveway, especially if they have mobility challenges or small kids, smaller than my daughter. But it's a very heavy piece of equipment. It's very expensive to transport. It's very difficult to place it. So if the expectation was that that truck went away and came back every day, it would have made the process much more difficult, much lengthier, and much more expensive. So again, I didn't get my driveway for 4 days, but at the end of the day, that's not really a disruption for me, in my opinion. And then once the trenching was complete, all the work was done internally. So even the disruption to the outside and the potential noise for neighbors is limited to a couple of days, and then everything is done internally and there's no disruption externally. It was noisy during the drilling and trenching process, less so during the trenching process. I took some proactive steps to just kind of reach out to my neighbors and prevent any potential complaints or backlash. I just gave them the heads up and you said, hey, we're going to be doing this project. You're going to see a lot of machinery, just rest assured that we followed the proper channels. The city is aware. This is what we're doing. When everybody's here doing the work, if you have questions, feel free to come over. And I feel like that went a really long way to making sure that, the people in my neighborhood were not upset or frustrated by what was going on. And I would really highly recommend this to anybody who's considering doing a project like this. just because, you know, it avoids any potential concerns or frustrations by giving advance notice. And it also gives your neighbors the opportunity to ask questions and express concerns that they might have, so that before the project even breaks ground, everybody knows what's coming and expecting it. And the more advance notice that you give them, the smoother the process will be. I firmly believe that. My wife also pointed out that, you know, we had so many neighbors kind of stopping by and asking what was going on and curious with the work that was being done, that it gave us a chance to meet people in a new neighborhood. So there was some positives that came out of that interaction. And I think that a lot of that had to do with us doing the best we could up front to let people know what was happening. The only really long-term disruptions that we have, even still today, are the front lawn and the driveway. But again, in my particular situation, these are not going to be huge problems for us. My future brother-in-law does driveways and is going to take care of my driveway in the spring. That's just a lucky coincidence for me, I suppose. But you know, with all the boulders and the large rocks that came out of the ground through the trenching process, my wife's actually really excited to make a cool rock garden where the grass used to be. So, you know, even what could be a disruption for other people, she's found a way to make into something cool. That said, another situation, there might be a couple $1,000s worth of extra work that needs to be done there. So again, the disruption is really going to be based on a project in person, case-by-case basis, and the disruption will vary based on the project itself and mitigating factors. So what are some of those potential mitigating factors? Installer involvement is a huge one. Because I went through the clean heating and cooling program, used an installer that had been vetted and gone through an RFP process. But you know, ACES really did a lot to make my life simpler and the process simpler. They handled all the equipment rebates for us. We never even had to touch that. They dealt with all the municipal requirements. All we had to do was sign a building permit. They really went out of their way to make sure that my involvement in this was really just telling them what I needed and then having them execute the project, which I really, really appreciated. Another potential mitigating factor might be the municipal requirements. In the city of Canandaigua, I needed a simple building permit. There are other communities who have ordinances on the books or considering ordinances that would restrict drilling on private property, which could be an issue for geothermal projects, obviously. Again, having a really involved installer that can help you navigate that process in the community that you're in is really important. The size and needs of the project are obviously going to be mitigating factors, but so is the kind of the property and space of your property and the layout that you have. It impacts how they can do the drilling and the type of drilling that they can do. It impacts the type of equipment they can use. It determines whether or not they can do a vertical or horizontal system. And with different equipment and different space limitations, you're potentially dealing with a longer drilling process that's going to be more invasive and more expensive. Another potential mitigating factor is geology. They scan all of these properties before they actually go in and start drilling. However, there are some times where you're going to run into things that you can't anticipate. You hit bedrock sooner than you thought you were going to, or you hit a pocket of methane or groundwater, or you know, the ground itself isn't stable enough to support a deep well. If that happens and you're going to need to change tactics, it's very possible that you're going to have a more expensive and more time-consuming process. The well drilling can create a real bottleneck. The installer that I worked with really only had 3 companies in the area that they trust to work with, that are consistent and do a great job, which I really appreciated. But that also means that they're tougher to schedule. And each of the drillers has different equipment and different ability and capacities, which means that, you know, if the large vertical drill hadn't worked in my case and we needed to adjust and go to a different approach, there would have been a longer delay, because now we would have had to book another driller with different equipment, and we would have needed to come up with a different approach for the project overall. And also seasonal availability. Nobody's probably drilling for geothermal systems right now because the ground's real hard. So there's a limited window in some cases for these guys to even do this work. But if you get the right people on your property doing the drilling, it's going to be a really quick and easy process. And as I mentioned, we had guys that were really focused on making sure that their impact on my property was minimal. There's also limitations on available equipment. The lead time for geothermals has increased from 3 to 4 days to 3 to 4 weeks during my project. and now it's getting up closer to 2 months. So if it is going to have a substantial lead time like that, it's obviously going to impact the timeline for your project. And again, just neighborhood reception. You might have people that no matter what you do to try and make everybody aware and answer questions, they're just not going to be happy. But again, I think that taking the time to be proactive and communicate with your neighbors and share the process with them and help them get involved on some level is a really good approach to prevent that from happening. So what did I buy? I am the type of person who doesn't mind paying a little bit more for something if I know that the quality is going to be there and the function is going to be there. So I went ahead and bought the Cadillac of water furnaces. It is the most efficient heat pump on the market. It's the industry's first fully launched variable capacity residential unit. In total, it has the potential to save up to 70% on heating, cooling, and hot water costs, which is definitely something I was extremely interested in because the whole purpose of this was trying to find a way to save money and not pay NICEAG in perpetuity. I also purchased an NP series non-pressurized flow center. This allows me to have a truly closed loop system with a control to control the pressure of the system. I can control vacuum relief. I can flush the system if I need to. If I hadn't gone with this particular piece of equipment, I would need to put in external flush ports, which then it makes it an open loop system, no matter how much you want to call it a closed loop system. But it considerably impacts the installation time and adds additional costs. So I thought for me, this was the best way to go because it was going to make this process less expensive, but also give me more control over the function of the system itself. I also bought a much larger hot water tank than I needed, but it was the most efficient one on market. And with a growing family, it seemed like a good idea to have a little bit more capacity if needed. It has 4 settings, one of which is vacation, which I think is really cool. If we're ever not going to be here for an extended period of time, we can put it on the vacation setting and it won't heat water until we change it. So the most efficient way to operate something is not to operate it. And I thought that that was a really great feature to have. But in total, it's going to save about 73% on my hot water cost, which I am very much a fan of. And lastly, I purchased a Symphony platform and programmable thermostat. The internal electronics on the geothermal have a Wi-Fi router that connects to a cloud. So any of the data from the system itself gets sent to the heat pump in the basement and then shared to the cloud through the Wi-Fi router that's in the base of it. I can access the system through my phone. I can access the system through my laptop. I have full control. I can control fan speeds, humidity. It's not just the temperature. And then thermostat itself actually acts as a storing and tracking mechanism on my energy costs and usage, and it holds up to 13 months of data. So I can go to my thermostat right now and look at all of the energy usage and the overall cost ever since we put the system in. I also have the ability to use their web-based or their online interface through the web page, and it allows me to pull all sorts of cool graphics and get information. The graphic that I'm showing you right now looks at the additional kilowatt hour usage per month for each function of the heat pump itself. So as you can see, in September and October, there was a little bit of cooling usage. And then October, November, December, January, there has been heating usage because it's cold outside. But again, another great tool for me to track how the system is impacting our expenses, and also for me to share out data on my experience. It'll be really fascinating to look back after a full year and see the type of impact that the system has actually had. So here's the real question. How much did it cost? If I were to just go out and do this project without any rebates or incentives, it would have been a $40,000 retrofit. Looking at that number right now gives me chills because that is a prohibitive number to me, to be quite honest. But when you have the rebates on the installed equipment, and then you have the 26% federal tax credit that gets applied after those rebates come off, the total project cost went down to $23,566. That includes a 10-year warranty on all the equipment and represented about a 42% reduction in cost on the overall project. So how am I paying for it? There's a bunch of different ways that you can pay for a project like this. Probably the most common or most popular would be a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit. We did not have enough equity and having just moved in, so we needed to explore some other options. There are different programs that can help finance these types of projects. NYSERDA has a program offering a 3.5% interest rate to consumers below a certain income threshold, which I did not qualify for. There are also different loan programs through the Department of Energy designed to help pay for these types of projects. And I actually decided to pilot a clean energy credit union. It's the name of it, is the Clean Energy Credit Union, for ACES and for the program, to see what that experience was like. And to be honest, if there was one part of this experience I was not satisfied with, it would have been this. There was definitely a learning curve. Even at the end, finalizing the long-term financing, there were some things that happened that I needed to push back on. So I would recommend not working with this particular vendor. However, there are other vendors that do similar work that may be better to work with. And ultimately, once we have more equity in the home, I will be taking out a home equity line of credit to finish paying for this project in a more efficient fashion. For the time being, the system has a $154 a month payment with a 20-year payoff. However, there's no penalty for an early payoff. So we're actually paying $185 at least every month to really cut down on the time that we're paying for this project. That should save us about $3,500 in loan interest and take off about 5 years on the overall payoff for the project. If we can put more towards it, we'll be able to accomplish it even sooner. So what's the estimated payback on the system? The simple calculation that you would use to determine this is you would subtract the annual cost of operation and annual gas usage in your home and subtract what it would cost to operate the geothermal system itself. So we didn't have very good data to use in this calculation because of the people who lived here before us had very different energy usage needs than we do. So what I decided to do was just take an average for a home of our size in the area, which is about $2,000 a year. Based on the heat load calculations that were done as part of this process, I've been told to expect that to heat and cool and heat water in my home will be about $600 a year. So the estimated annual savings there is $1,400. You take the total project cost and divide it by the estimated annual savings, and you would get a payback time of 16 years and 10 months, which is really good for a project like this. Anything 20 to 25 years is considered a really good payback period. So we're well below that. But I also think in my case, it's important to include the sunk and prospective costs. We knew that these needed to be replaced regardless of whether or not we went with a geothermal system, and they all needed to be replaced right now. So I took the total project cost and subtracted the lowest natural gas replacement estimate that we got for the project from the total cost, which reduces it to $10,566. You divide that by the estimated annual savings, and you're looking at an estimated payback of 7 years and 6 months, which is even better. Now, we've had a very warm winter to this point, and as a result, the savings that we've experienced through using the system have been far greater than we anticipated. From September 1st to December 31st, it cost a total of $98.91 to keep my house at 69 degrees and have hot water. That cost representing the additional electric use, including supply and delivery. So based on the average that I'm seeing in terms of the energy usage, it's going to be substantially less than $600 a year. So I took that $98 number, multiplied it by 3, came up with $300. When you change the annual savings, it brings it down to a 6-year, 3-month payoff. I think that's really optimistic. I think we'll probably fall somewhere around the 7-year mark. But either way, it's just going to be a really great investment in our home and something that's really going to add value. It's added about $20,000 to the value of the house, just being able to say that we have a geothermal system on it. So why would we do this? The benefits for the decision provide the context, quite frankly. It's safer. We no longer have fossil fuel combustion or carbon monoxide emissions in our home. And not having that internal combustion also contributes to a longer useful life for the heat pump that was put in. Since we have all electric appliances, we've completely eliminated our gas bill. Based on the prior usage history, gas bills for this house from September to April were anywhere on average from $100 to $175 a month. And despite not having any gas appliances in the month of April, we still managed to have a $30 gas bill. My electric in August, which was an extremely warm month, was high because we needed to turn on the AC unit, and that monthly bill was $175 when our average electric bill up to that point had been about $50 to $70. So essentially, the cost of the gas and the increased electric in the summer for the AC offsets the monthly payment that I'm making on the geothermal system and is essentially a wash. When I'm done paying for the system, I am done paying to heat and cool my home, and I am no longer paying NYSEG in perpetuity to heat this home, which is great because I'm no longer using natural gas. We've eliminated the uncertainty and variability of natural gas prices. The cost for natural gas is on the rise right now, as is the cost for propane. Electric is also a variable commodity and it can fluctuate, but it tends to be a little bit more stable, and it's not a fossil fuel. So if I have to pay a little bit more for it, I'm okay with that. Based on the heat load calculations, I'll be able to heat and cool a 2,000 square foot home for about $600 a year. That's phenomenal, and we're seeing even greater savings than that because we haven't had as cold a winter as we might have otherwise. And as a little cherry on top, the city of Canandaigua, where I live, operates on a community choice aggregation agreement, which is 100% renewable electric. So moving to geothermal has allowed us to eliminate the carbon footprint of our home completely, with the potential to have a negative carbon footprint. I live in a community that is very environmentally conscious, even at the municipal level. We have a lake that drives economic development and provides drinking water to 70,000 people in the region. So anything that my family can do to contribute to the health and viability of where we live, we're happy to do that. Some additional things to consider. It's not a project that you can do at the drop of a hat, and it really requires some foresight and planning. So if you have your furnace go and you're just kind of thinking about doing a geothermal system, it's not going to work. Especially with the lead times for the drillers, the lead times for the equipment itself. You're kind of probably going to find yourself in a situation where your only option is just to replace what's there. The timing was also right for us, and it might not be for everyone. We were in a situation where all three components needed to be fixed and replaced and gone. Had the furnace been newer, had the AC been more efficient and newer, it would have changed the entire calculation and we might have made a different choice. But knowing that all three needed to be replaced, it made this decision easier to make. It also needs to be said that without those credits and incentives, this is not a project we would have done. You know, the difference between the estimates that we were getting for replacement equipment and the cost of that geothermal system that we ended up putting in, there's a delta there between $22,000 and $27,000. And then that's a lot of money. So having existing ductwork reduced the cost for us as well. But without the rebates and incentive programs, you know, that delta is much larger than I would have been comfortable paying. So we probably would have made a different choice. Drilling and trenching are by far the most expensive part of the process and have the greatest impact on cost. But once it's done, it's done. You only have to do that once. And once that loop is there, barring any circumstances that are unforeseen, you don't need to open the ground back up. So in the event that you have to switch equipment out, the cost for the heat pumps and the standard furnace is comparable-ish, but you also are going to get a greater useful life out of that heat pump than you will out of a standard furnace. So in the end of the day, you're paying a little bit more, but you're going to have a much longer useful life for that piece of equipment. And I guess the best way for me to really demonstrate the savings and the impact that this has had, this is my January RG&E bill. It's due today, so I'm glad I have the slide in here because it's going to remind me to pay it. But from November 19th to December 20th, so for that billing cycle, my total electric cost was $63.32. That's everything. That's our appliances, that's our washer and dryer, that's heating and cooling our home, that's our hot water, that's everything. And I don't have another bill from NYSEG contributing to the overall cost. So for me to see this paying $63 in a winter month, all in, I think is a pretty fantastic bargain. That's the end of the presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions that are in the chat box for people that have them. Also, here's my contact information. If you want to reach out at any point, if you have any questions, you want to follow up, I'd be happy to help. I love talking about this project and process, and I've been beyond satisfied with the results that we've had. So with that, I just really want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and taking the time to listen. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. Really appreciate hearing about your experience. So yeah, folks, feel free to either unmute yourself or put a question in the chat. We've got some already. I think most of them have been either answered through Rob's presentation or by Belle. So thank you for following up with folks as we went. We do have a couple of installers here too who may be more relevant to answer questions. Do folks who are installers want to say your name and the company you work with real quick? These are from our vetted companies.
I guess I'll go first. I'm here from ACES Energy, the installer of Rob's system, and my name is Belle.
Belle is also fantastic to work with, as an aside.
Thanks, Rob.
Awesome. I know we've got Matt here too. I don't know if he'll hop off mute. That's all I see. You see any others, Lindsay?
That's it from tonight, I think.
Oh, so yeah, anyone can field your questions. And then we had one from David. What maintenance does the new system need, if any? And when are you getting solar?
So I'm laughing at the second one because it's actually something that we looked at. Unfortunately, we don't have great southern access anywhere on our property to where we'd really be able to maximize the benefits of that. In terms of maintenance that I have, I need to check that non-pressurized flow center just to make sure that the water level is right. I think in the time that we've had the system, I might have had to add water once. I need to check the air filter like you would with any standard furnace to make sure that that's clear and replace that as needed. And they recommended that I flush the hot water tank once a year. And they showed me how to do that, but also said that if I had any questions, they would help me with that process if needed. So the maintenance that I have is very minimal.
Great. Other questions? Don't be shy. Feel free to jump in. We've got a question, another one from David. Are you using the of the heat pump?
Using the superheater functionality of the heat pump. I'm not sure what he's referring to.
So I don't think you got the de-superheater, Rob.
Okay.
It's like an addition that you can add on to your unit that uses essentially the waste heat from the Geo unit that doesn't get used to heat your home, or
Gotcha.
from the cooling process to preheat your water.
Gotcha. No, I am not using that because I do not have it. Great question. How is the noise of the hybrid hot water system compared to a gas hot water? I never hear it. Either the geothermal or the hot water system itself. The only time that you'll hear them is if you're in the basement changing over the laundry and standing right next to them. You'll hear the fan kick on. But in terms of noise in the house, there's absolutely none. I'd also kind of want to reiterate that every room in my house is the exact same climate. Which is fantastic. My daughter's room used to be the hottest room in the house by 6 or 7 degrees, and we thought that we had problems with our ductwork. However, once we put the system in and it went live, we found that that was not the case, and her room has maintained the same temperature as every other room in our home. The geothermal heat pump runs like a traditional furnace. It kicks on a couple of times a day or as needed. In the cooler months, it might have been kicking on maybe 4 or 5 times a day just to maintain the climate. It's definitely kicked on more recently, obviously, with as cold as it's been, but it doesn't run constantly all day. It only runs when it needs to. It'd be a multi-zone system. Yeah, I'm sure that the capability to do that would be there. I don't see why not.
Belle says yes, it can be multi-zoned.
Yeah. Does your house have any insulation upgrades, i.e. spray foam? Yes. So prior to us moving in, the folks we bought the home from did do some spray foam insulation in the attic. That definitely contributes to the efficiency that we're experiencing right now. They also made sure that all the windows were sealed and new and energy efficient windows. Those were two of the projects that they did kind of prior to moving out, to add some value to the home. So when, coupled with a really efficient HVAC system, we're definitely experiencing a lot of energy efficiency benefits. Do you ever see your house temperature off the temperature set point of the thermostat? That's a really good question. So when they came in and they set my system up, they basically asked me what was the temperature that I was looking for. And I told them that 68, 69 degrees would be good. So that the way that the system is set up is it goes from a range of 70 to 68. And if it hits one of those thresholds, it's when the system will kick in to regulate itself. So, it sometimes is 70 for a very brief period of time. It's sometimes 68 for a very brief period of time. But then it'll regulate itself and be back at the set temperature. Set it and forget it is what I was told. And that's really the most efficient way to use a system like this. With a lot of conventional furnaces, sometimes people will, turn them down at night because they're not going to be using the heat as much. So, where they'll keep the house at 68 during the day, they'll go down to 64 at night. But that's actually a detriment to the efficiency of the system because it makes it work a lot harder than it needs to. So the installers told me that my best option was to just set it and forget it and leave it. And then that would really help me experience optimal efficiency unless I really wanted to drill down into the finer points and get really specific with some of the programming. So that's the other thing that's really great about this system is I never have to touch it. I don't have to worry about people messing with the thermostat. So it really has been a set it and forget it experience.
Any other questions? Folks are welcome to unmute yourself too if you want to say it out loud. David says, how many geothermal contractors did you consult before choosing ACES?
So because I went through the clean heating and cooling program, ACES was the vetted installer in my area. So that was ultimately how I got to ACES. I can tell you that the estimates that we had done prior to deciding to go geothermal, we had 6 or 7, which is where we got that range from 13 to 18,000 based on who we were talking to and what they were recommending for that project. But I can also tell you that the vetting process that these installers go through to be part of these clean heating and cooling programs really make sure that the person or the people that you're getting are going to be top quality. There are questions on the RFP about what kind of level of customer support can you provide? How can you simplify the process for the consumer? What's going to differentiate you from the other people responding to this RFP? And I can tell you that I couldn't be happier with who I worked with. Just from start to finish, the process was fantastic. And I'm glad that ACES was ultimately who was selected for my region.
David's wondering where they can get a list of qualified installers for the area. Where are you based, David? Livingston County.
So I'll take this unless Kevin wants to jump in. My understanding, I think, is that Livingston's outside of the Finger Lakes. Well, I'm just silly. But anyone in New York State can find vetted installers by NYSERDA from the New York State Clean Heat website. So you go to New York Clean Heat. Here, I'll put it in the chat in a second. But anyway, so you can look through and get installers that way. Kevin, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Thank you, Lindsay. Livingston does not have an actual clean heat community program in their county, but the Heat Smart North Finger Lakes North campaign, as well as the Heat Smart Finger Lakes South campaign, we all kind of work. All the campaigns kind of work together to help any customers who are looking for any issues that they have. So if you want to go to our website, it looks like Jenny just dropped it in the chat. Thank you, Jenny, for doing that. But we all kind of work together. So if you go to NYSERDA, you look for that information, or go to any one of our websites, you can find out and we can work with it. And although there's not one in Livingston County, definitely ACES is one of the our installers that work in our campaigns, and we can help you link up or help you navigate what's the right thing to do. Thank you.
I got a really good question about a doggy door. And I think it's a very fair question to ask. Do you have to give something like that up, a dog door, a cat door, to have a solution for that? So we do have a dog door. It's in our 3 seasons room. So whenever the dog needs to go out, we have bells hanging from the handle. It hits the handle. We let him into the 3 seasons room. He handles his business, and then he comes back in and rings the bell and let us know when he's ready to come back in. I don't know if I would have a doggy door on an external door of my house personally. I think if I had one, I would probably switch my door. But that's a really good question. Would there be heat loss from a situation like that? And I think that's probably possible. Yeah, he's pretty awesome.
I'll jump in too and say, for folks who are wondering about costs or incentives, we do have another event coming up this coming Monday at 7. I'll put the links in the chat also, and we'll follow up with folks. But that's a good space to learn kind of the newest incentives that might be available. And it's different for different people, sometimes based on where you live and based on your income as well. So, and of course, Rob went with the Cadillac version. So some options don't cost as much also. So
I think that's a fair point to mention that, had I gone with less expensive equipment, it definitely would have impacted the cost. Had I gone with a 4 size instead of a 5 size, had I not used the non-pressurized flow center, there were definitely things that we could have done to reduce the cost of the project. But if I'm going to go all in, I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to get the best that I can get.
Yeah, and you were making an investment that you could make.
This is my forever home. We're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting that you perceived that it actually turns off, but the Series 7 is a variable speed system. So my understanding is it basically just drops down to a very, very low level, and then it'll ramp up when it's needed. So it's interesting to hear the homeowner's perspective of how it's actually working.
Yeah. I mean, you never hear it unless you're standing right next to it when it kicks on. So it's quieter than what was here, that's for sure.
Any other questions from folks? Brian says it will get to the point where it turns off.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate everyone. We will be sending a follow-up email, and if you selected to get updates from us, we will be letting you know about upcoming events and other news on incentives and changes and things like that as they come up. If you want to connect with a installer and you're in the Onondaga, Cayuga, Cortland, Madison, or Oswego counties, you can feel free to enroll with us at heatsmartcny.enroll. Allison dropped that in the chat. Kevin, you want to mention your website for those enrolling with you?
Yep, Jennifer did drop it in the chat already, but you can contact us at HeatSmart heatsmartfingerlakes.org. We share a website with Monroe. We kind of join it. So if you want to get to anyone in the city of Monroe, or you want to get to anyone in Orleans, Genesee, Wayne, or Ontario County. But I'm also the seat representative for the Finger Lakes region. So if you contact us, you've had past stones or just any way you want to contact us, we'll help you figure out exactly what you need to do and help to move this process on for you. Thank you.
And we will have a recording of this available. We'll find it on our YouTube site in a little bit, and feel free to share it with others. Thanks so much. I want to thank Rob for presenting, and for our solid partners from joining us, and some of our community campaign partners. And yeah, together we're going to make a difference in the world. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Rob.
Good job, Rob. Really good job.
Yeah.